Hi, and welcome to Progressive Podcast Australia. I'm Nick, and I'm joined on the show by Claire. Welcome, Claire.
Hi.
And we've just on 3CR Community Radio done a summer special all about the politics of ice hockey. And we're doing this as a bit of a follow-up discussion because as much as that was a 1 hour show, we still had so much that we wanted to discuss that we didn't get to. So we're doing this as a bit of a follow-up show. And yeah, I guess maybe just to promote that, do you want to talk about some of the things we covered a bit on that show?
Yeah, so now I'm having a mental blank.
I can do it if you like.
What do we start with? Oh yeah, we started with a conversation around the Chicago team and their name and logo, and the politics of using the names and images of, well, purportedly Indigenous people, although there is kind of a debate with the Chicago team in particular about sort of how much their logo actually represents the Indigenous, real Indigenous person that it's supposed to, and the kind of politics about using a real Indigenous person, and how that plays into kind of this idea of, racist, stereotypical imagery of Indigenous people, um, being told that this is some way of honouring Indigenous people by, settler teams across Canada and the US. And some of the conversations around that and how that plays into what Professor Kevin Brunel has termed settler memory, and the different ways that, race and indigeneity function in the US. And then we moved on to a conversation around Black Lives Matter and some of the activism, how that was taken up by some players in the NHL, and then the NHL's pretty terrible response or lack thereof, really, honestly, and how it's taken them 3 years since 2020 to actually start their own diversity and inclusion committee, which we'll get into more conversation about that because it seems particularly ironic that 2023 is the year that they decided to launch that, as well as being the year that they decided to come down very heavily on special theme nights and the politics of that. And then we talked about some incredible acts of solidarity by an Indigenous trio called the Barehead Sisters, who were invited by the Edmonton Oilers to sing at their Indigenous theme night, sing the national anthem in the Stony Nakota language. And the Barehead Sisters actually wore Palestinian kufiyas, and that went on air as part of as part of the coverage of that game, and how that plays into or sort of runs up against actually the kind of we stand with Israel discourse that's been coming out from the NHL, both organisationally and then at a team and then at an individual player level. So yeah, that was a pretty incredible thing to see circulating around on social media, was the Barehead Sisters and their act of solidarity, and just how brave that was for three Indigenous women to take that stance.
Yeah, so if that takes your interest, you can find it 3cr.org.au/freedom of species, or search freedom of species on your favorite podcast app and find the only episode with ice hockey in the title somewhere, probably. But yeah, well, that narrows it down quite a bit, I think, for our show. But yeah, we'll also put a link directly to it in the description. We're also recording this on YouTube, so I'll put a link up to the YouTube show as well if anyone wants to listen to a YouTube version of this show as well. Yeah, I guess I should also start off by allowing you to introduce yourselves. Hopefully, some of our listeners have checked out Freedom of Species, the other show I'm a part of, but yeah, do you want to just say a little bit about yourself before we get into the discussion? Because it might be for some of our listeners the first time hearing from you.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Claire. I use they, them pronouns. I live on Dja Dja Wurrung country in central Victoria. Um, I am about to start next year a Masters of Social Work at La Trobe University, which is very exciting, and hopefully will, yeah, lead to hooking me in a bit more with the local community up here because, yeah, this previous year I've continued to work at the University of Melbourne while, yeah, commuting from central Victoria, which is not an ideal thing to have in your life. But yeah, my sort of academic background's in Indigenous studies, so I have a Bachelor of Arts in that from the University of Melbourne, and since graduating from that course, I've taught into various Indigenous studies related classes across various disciplines, including politics, education, cultural studies, and there's possibly more, but that's all that springs to mind at the moment. Yeah, and I'm a vegan and have a long sort of history of activism since about the age of 16 in the Melbourne left. So I was involved in, when I was in high school with things like the Richmond Secondary College struggle and the VSU campaign and so forth. So yeah, I've been around the left in Melbourne for a long time. And, like a lot of people at the moment, I guess the thing that's really occupying my time is Palestinian solidarity work.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm joining from the lands of the Wurundjeri people, the Kulin Nation. I did want to say as well that I guess I think the episodes that we're doing, these two different episodes, will probably make sense to listen to either way. But again, if you want to listen to them in the order that we recorded them, you can check out the Freedom Species ones first, or you can listen to this one first and go back and hear that one. I guess from the first one, another thing we got into, which I thought was pretty great, was your journey into ice hockey, which we won't necessarily go back over in depth, but Claire got into hockey through fan fiction. And I guess just a bit of a follow-up question from doing that episode and listening back. I can't quite remember if we touched on this, but I was just a bit confused in that generally people they like Harry Potter and then they read Harry Potter fan fiction or whatever the thing is. And so I guess what was appealing about ice hockey fan fiction? Was it an author you happened to wrote about ice hockey, or just thought I'll give it a go? Or I was just curious about what piqued your interest,
I mean,
considering that was your first knowledge of hockey, I guess. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think the 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 relationship between published ice hockey books and fan fiction is really interesting. So a lot of the books that are published did start off as fan fiction, and I came across the actual published works first and have kind of discovered a few of the fan fiction. I think, there is a bit of a taboo in the fan fiction community about writing what's called real people fiction. So that it's a bit what's the word, like non-consensual to write romances about people who really exist. But one of my favorites is Rachel Reid. She's a Canadian author, and her books are, I heard about them on the internet. Like everybody, when you read hockey romances, people will be like, Heated Rivalry is the number one. You have to go and read that. So I'd kind of heard whispers of this. And then a friend of mine who's super into hockey romances as well was like, no, you have to. And I was like, okay. So I went away and read that. And that apparently, and very much from the author's note at the end, is like Sidney Crosby, Alex Ovechkin fan fiction. It's a love story between this really sweet Canadian player who's amazing, and then this hilarious. He's one of the funniest characters I've ever read. Arrogant Russian player. And I've seen some photos recently of Sydney and Alex in their early days. And Rachel in the author's notes does say that she wrote it after watching a documentary about the Penguins and the Capitals playing each other in, I think, the 2011 Stanley Cup finals. So yeah, it's very clearly like started off as fanfic. But yeah, there's a whole incredible universe that a friend of mine and I have just finished reading called the You Could Make a Life universe, and it has its own wiki. And the author has something like like 17 different series that she's written, and they're all like interconnected and people recur throughout them. And yeah, it's incredible. And one of them that is still going at the moment is her longest one, called Impaired Judgment. And I think she's up to like chapter 174, 176 of that. So yeah, she's been writing that forever, but she's also published. She's yeah, taken some of those fanfics and traditionally published them, or self-published actually. And one of them is this really incredible one called Thrown Off the Ice, which is about somebody who ends up with traumatic brain injuries from being an enforcer, which was really, really interesting. And yeah, very much, it's obviously not the romance element, but the brain injury stuff is actually based on her own brother's experience of ending up with CBE as a hockey player. So yeah, it sort of adds this extra layer of incredible tragedy to that story, knowing that that's based on her own brother's experiences with brain injury. Yeah, so yeah, it's kind of a wild way to
Yeah,
get
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
but people like Rachel and Taylor, who wrote Taylor Fitzpatrick, who wrote the You Could Make a Life universe, are super like huge hockey fans themselves, and it does come through in the books. There's other people who write stuff where the hockey is very light on. But yeah, I just really found myself intrigued by the descriptions and kind of wanted to know a little bit more. And it's really funny to now watching like when the commentators are describing different plays, and I'm like, oh, that's where they got the name of that book, like Odd Man Rush and
Hmm.
Drive the Net and Delay of Game. These are all like hockey romance.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's pretty funny. Like oh, okay, cool, yeah.
Yeah, and we'll probably bring up lots of terms that people don't understand and probably not be able to explain them all. But one of them was you mentioned like enforcer, which is someone who fights a lot. And
Yeah.
yeah, and often I believe they do have quite short careers in a lot of cases because of head injuries and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
that sort of was something I wish like I was like, oh, we should have talked about that on our last episode recording, was the fact that when we were talking about capitalism and
Mm,
the the just intensity of the hockey season, and the fact that they play 82 games in a regular season and then they have the playoffs on top of that, is that the average age of retirement in the NHL is 25 years old.
wow.
Yeah, yeah, like people's bodies get so destroyed, and the kind of injuries that they sustain on the ice are often so severe that yeah, people have these incredibly short careers. Yeah, and I've just finished reading two hockey biographies by Indigenous players, and and one of them was playing in the 50s, and I think the other one was playing maybe like in the 80s. And things are definitely better now. But yeah, back in the day, if you were playing in the 50s and you were injured, like see you later, like no health insurance, no salaries paid by insurance companies, which the players get these days. I was reading about someone the other day that's on a $68 million contract and has such severe head injuries that he's played like once in the last couple of years. He's
Wow.
getting $8 million a year payout from the insurance company because he did sign in like an 8-year contract or something. So at least he's, still got an income coming in. But if that was the 50s, he just would have been basically left for dead by the industry. So yeah.
Yeah, it kind of almost reminds me, like, again, me and Claire do an animal rights show, Freedom of Species, but a little bit like the horse racing industry. It's like kind of just burning through the players. There'll always be new ones ready to fill the thing, and the CEOs don't really care because they'll have some, young fit players on the ice, and when then they get head injuries or whatever, then there'll be some new ones to take their place, and kind of that replaceable
Yeah.
notion, I guess. It's obviously different because the players, there's like consent from the players. I definitely don't want to say it's the same as horse racing, but perhaps like a similar mindset from the higher ups, I guess.
And I also wonder with their ages, right? Like,
Mm,
yes, there is consent, but we know that people's brains don't fully mature until they're about 25 years old. And if you've got people playing and retiring by the time they're 25, like how much informed consent are they really giving? And also there's such a like stupid macho culture, like, with things like the safety measures, there's always like, oh no, but the players won't want that new safety measure introduced because they'll kind of see that as like a bit babying, and the grandfathering in clauses where people are allowed to keep using unsafe practices because they were actually brought into the league at a certain point when there wasn't, for example, like wearing helmets during warm-ups. Like some players don't have to wear them because their clauses are grandfathered in that they don't because that wasn't a thing when they started playing. They don't have to. The same with mouth guards. Yeah, it's wild. And if you ever watch the way that the players who do wear the mouth guards treat their mouth guards as like more like a chew toy than a piece of protective equipment, you're just like, please stop doing that. And yeah, like I literally saw someone spit teeth and pick up their like at least four teeth from the ice in one of the Seattle games earlier this year, and I was like, that's why you should wear your mouth guard instead of just have it hanging half out your mouth chewing it. But yeah, anyway,
Yeah, yeah,
yes,
that happened in the game before me the other night, actually. It's happened to someone. But yeah, mouth guard or a full cage might be a good idea as well. But that
yeah.
seems beyond the question. But yeah, it's interesting because something which I might touch on briefly, I guess I am touching on briefly, but is veganism in ice hockey. And I did have a quick look into that. And one player who I don't believe was vegan, but I believe like improved his performance by switching to a nearly totally plant-based diet was Chara. And he played, do you know Chara? Or yeah,
No,
no, okay, might have been a bit before you. I think he retired in the last couple of years, but yeah, he ended up playing till he was, I think, around about 45.
wow.
And I know Timu Solani from Finland as well. Again, probably before the time you follow, but perhaps he's so famous you might have heard of him. But yeah, I think he played till he was at 46. But I guess it's like these are sort of the lucky ones or the best case scenario, and the ones who just like get injured early in the career, just never hear about them, I guess, because yeah, again, because of those sort of high profile players, I was kind of thinking it was a sport where they played a bit longer than other sports like AFL football, for example, as well, which has its own issues, I guess.
Um, it is interesting. I did watch some stupid like team social media thing where they were interviewing people about what coffees they drink. you know, I feel sorry for the social media managers having to come up with these new, and hockey players are famously like no personality in interviews because they don't want to say the wrong thing, and yeah, they'll get the same kind of media training about how to give like empty answers, and also they get asked the same fucking boring questions like it's just ridiculous. Like, oh, you're losing. How can you win? And they're just like play harder. And it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
like just leave them alone. But anyway, heaps of the players said that they had their coffee order was using non-dairy milk. So I was like, okay, that's interesting. Like, I wonder if there is a real, and there's this real obsession with Connor Bedard's diet because he has a really like intense, probably the poor kid has like an eating disorder. But yeah, like a really, really intense sort of like high performance diet. And people were kind of laughing because they were saying, some of the like really well known famous players would just like smash a pizza during the period breaks and stuff, and like just famously like just ate disgustingly. So yeah, I think maybe some of the younger ones who are trying to do the really high performance diets are perhaps leaning more towards like plant-based, or at least steering clear of dairy and stuff, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's something that I've noticed in cricket, actually. I know one of the famous cricketers, Steve Smith, was saying, "Oh, I never liked, soy milk or almond milk, and then I found oat milk and I loved it, and I'm going to start an oat milk company, all this kind of stuff." And it's like that's such a new thing of like in the past people wouldn't even tried it unless you're lactose intolerant, then maybe, but otherwise it's like you wouldn't even be experimenting to find your non-dairy milk. So I feel like there's been change in that regard, including within sport. Yeah, and quite a few vegans
Well,
in cricket. Yeah.
all the hockey players that were using non-dairy were all using oat. So
Yeah, yeah.
I think that's possibly, yeah, a taste thing, but then also like the whole macho shit about, soy milk's full of estrogen and all that kind of
Yeah, yeah.
crap.
Yeah, yeah. I'm an old school vegan, so I'm still soy milk, but
Yeah,
yeah. But yeah, I guess yeah, as you're talking about the hockey stuff, I do see a lot of parallels with other sports like cricket and football, for example. So cricket, there's a hectic schedule where like the Australian team, but all the international teams play like hectic, like year round, hardly any breaks, any spare game, any spare time. They'll schedule some time in. They'll schedule some extra games. And recently, Australia won the 50 over World Cup, the 1 day World Cup. And I think about 2 days later, they're playing another tournament against India. And it turns out that the International Cricket Board lost games during COVID, and they're trying to make those games up now, rather than just going, okay, that didn't happen, let's move on, when the schedule was already packed pre-COVID. And because of COVID lockdown stuff, they miss games, and so they're bringing those games. So that's why it's particularly particularly rushed at the moment. I guess my question for you in terms of we'll see how much we'll mainly focus on hockey, but
yeah.
were you a sport person and hockey became another sport, or were you not a sport person and hockey is won you over to this one sport?
I mean, I've watched like soccer in the past,
Mhm.
and yeah, like I played tennis as a kid, and I used to live in Footscray, and when the AFLW started, that was a really fantastic thing to do, was go just literally walk across the road and go to AFLW games. And I believe
Mm.
from chatting with friends of mine who'd followed the AFL for a long time, the AFLW kind of really community atmosphere was what AFL or VFL felt really like back in the day before, it became this like huge, corporate behemoth that, no one can bloody afford to, ordinary people really struggle to be able to afford to buy season tickets or go to games. And, in the AFLW, like at the end, everyone would run onto the fields and like have a kick to kick and all that
Mm.
kind of stuff. And yeah, friends of mine were saying that's really what like it used to be like going to games when they were kids. So that was really lovely. But yeah, there's just something about the speed and the grace of ice hockey and the skill that really just I just find incredible. Yeah, really, really like it in a way that no other sports really appealed to me before. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's kind of weird.
yeah, yeah,
a
yeah.
weird, as an Australian, a weird sport to be into.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I am into the weird one. Like hockey's a weird one, but I am into the more like meat and potatoes, the more normal Australian sports I grew up in the cricket program at my high school and playing footy and then yeah, discovered hockey and went down that road. But in more recent years, I've definitely got back into watching cricket and footy as well as hockey. I love the FLW. I do feel it's much less corporate, much more progressive, much more pro-queer and all those kinds of
Yeah,
things, very much less macho, obviously, perhaps. But yeah, also just much less, yeah, professionalized. And I mean that in a positive sense, in
yeah,
terms of you hear an interview after the game, at least at this point, maybe it'll change in a few years, but they actually just say what they want, at least
yeah,
most of the time.
yeah,
Whereas like every AFL interview, you could just say, just like, oh, we're glad to get the 4 points, ask them any question. They just like the hockey players, they just shut down
yeah,
the interview basically. So I kind of like that they're excited that yeah, I'm thinking about the grand final, and that men it's like I'll just take it one game at a time. They're like, yeah, we want to win the grand final, and we are thinking about it now. And you hear the women interviewed, so it's yeah, very different vibe. Um,
there are definitely players who do buck the kind of like very traditional corporate boring answers, but that
mhm.
seems to happen really early in their careers. Like Jack Hughes is a bit famous for his brutal honesty when he was younger.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
now he wears the A. I don't know if he's still, yeah, is yeah, quite as honest. Although I did see a great interview. I don't know if you know, he and his brother actually collided during a game, and they're on the same team. They
Mhm.
do have a third brother who's on a different team, but they collided on a power play the other day. And someone asked him about that, obviously, because everybody was just like, oh my God. That was the big story from that particular game. And he was like, yeah, it was horrible. I nearly knocked all his teeth out with the top of my helmet, which
Wow.
I was like, oh, cool. That's not a canned answer. It's like a really realistic human answer. But yeah, they're usually just, yeah, very dull interviews.
Yeah, and I do feel sorry for the players as well because they often get asked that like they're the best player of the game, and they'll get interviewed by the news media, and then they'll get interviewed when they get their like trophy or something like that, and they get asked the exact same question, and they kind of, as I said before, like yeah,
Yeah.
it would be difficult. So yeah, I guess I will definitely get into like hockey specifically in a moment. I guess just one thing that popped into my head about sport is I kind of feel like amongst sort of the left and radical politics, sport is seen as something that's a bit right wing or a bit at least like normello, just like, you know, yeah, the people who like sport are kind of like, yeah, they're the normellos or perhaps right wing or whatever, and we're not into sport. Like, how do you feel about that as someone with radical politics and like engaging with sport? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean it is really conflicting, right? Because even if you don't want to engage with some of the more corporate elements of it, there's just no escaping it. Like
Mm,
literally, watching ice hockey games, like there's all these weird TV breaks now built into the games and
mm,
stuff like that, and they will just like anytime the players there's a stoppage of play for a reset or an adjudication of something, they're just crammed. Like obviously the TV companies are there like waiting for as soon as the opportunity arises, they're like quick push an ad in. Sometimes you do it does interfere with like the commentary of the game. Yeah, and it'll be for awful stuff. Like, every single game I watch on ESPN starts off with a friggin' Macca's ad. I think it's Macca's
mm,
and Hungry Jacks. I fast forward them.
mm,
And then there's like heaps of like the New Jersey Devils, whose games I often watch. Like they've got gambling ads built in all the way through the yeah, like they're like, it's not too late to bet on the game. I'm like,
mm.
well, it is because I'm watching the replay. So thanks. But yeah, like they're really, really trying to push, yeah, just every second of the game, and all around, the on the boards. There's advertising, so you just can't look away. Like it is super corporate. And then yeah, being a like Palestine supporter, every free, well, a lot of teams, I don't know if every team, but a lot of teams, and it like put out "We Stand with Israel" statements following October 7, which was really awful to see. And yeah, just and we will get into this later, but the latest stuff with the Pride games and stuff, it just felt really like yeah, like as a queer supporter, I wasn't welcome in, and this was the first season that I was going to watch, and literally the announcement about Pride Tape being banned came out literally the day before the season started, and that just yeah really overshadowed the excitement of the season starting. So yeah, it is very conflicting, I
Yeah,
think. Um,
absolutely.
but I mean, there's lovely things about it. These people are incredibly skilled. It's really engaging to watch. You feel part of a real community. I'm part of some, Facebook and various other like Discord groups and stuff where people get together and chat. So there's a real community around it too. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like there's, yeah, like I definitely see something to that narrative, I guess, in terms of the idea of like the radical people might be at a rally rather than the sport. But I do think we actually did a Christmas episode of Freedom of Species, and I do think that as much as we don't have to like leave our politics behind when we enter these spaces, like engaging with things outside of rallies and stuff is important as well. And so I think there's that as well. I also think there's something to be said, I think, about like engaging with discussions around social justice issues outside of a more formal activist context, because I think there's there are some people who'll probably not read an activist flyer or won't go to a rally and that kind of thing. And I don't think we should give up to those people. Like I was pretty apolitical until I started listening to punk rock music. So there might be that sort of, that sort of trigger for people to enter into things. But at least that, like, as it stands at the moment, there's lots of people who like don't aren't sort of engaged in that formal activism. So I feel like we can have these discussions about queer rights, women's rights, anti-racism, whatever it might be, but within the context of sport, kind of meeting people where they are. And that's not to take away from traditional activism. For certainly like the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020 led to like a huge like formal protest, led to a huge change in attitudes in such a short period of time. So it definitely has its place. But I do think sort of engaging with this stuff, like again, meeting people where they're at. I was recently watching a women's cricket game, and they were talking about the idea that there's been a lot of progress for the women's game, like for those at the top, like for the professional players, and increase in pay and that kind of stuff, which is good. But it hasn't necessarily filtered down to like, girls and club cricket and that kind of thing. And so that really reminded me of discussions we've had on the podcast before about what Naomi Klein calls trickle down identity politics, of having representation at the top but not necessarily filtering down. So I was like, they're kind of having that discussion. They're not sort of reading Naomi Klein necessarily, but they're having this discussion already. And so I feel like we can kind of engage with these issues at a place where people are already at as well. So I think there is some value to engaging with sport, both as a non-political thing, but also in those political discussions already going on too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Mm.
Yeah, and there's definitely some people in, some individuals in the sport who are really showing how representation and allyship can have really impressive, really, really impressive impacts.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes, but yes, the kind of brown faces in high places, identity politics, whether we're talking about race or gender, is so limited. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And if you want to hear me saying that for about 2 hours, you can check out those old episodes, or they were 3 hour summer special as well, actually. But yeah, I guess let's talk hockey, which has been in my head since our Freedom of Species show, which was a soundbite of commentators in a propaganda song. But I thought we'd make the most of the YouTube channel. I'll just show my jersey to the camera. I think you got to see that.
yeah.
And for most of our listeners who'll be listening via the podcast, it's a Atlanta Thrashers jersey, who Claire probably may not have heard of. No, so it's before your hockey time.
Yeah,
And I guess for our listeners, I quite like the design of the jersey. It's like a dark blue one with maroon and yellow, and then it's got something in the middle. I'm not sure exactly what that is, but some kind of logo. But yeah, so it shows, I guess, how long I've been following hockey for, and also perhaps I don't throw out my clothes as well. But the Atlanta Thrashers were an NHL team from 1999 to 2011. And then they were bought out and they became the Winnipeg Jets from 2011
I was
onwards.
thinking it looked like the Jets logo, actually.
Oh, okay. So they might have
Yeah,
had some homage to that. And they were not a very good team. They only reached the playoffs in 1 year in 2006 07 and lost that in round one. That was the only time they ever reached the playoffs. So not a very successful team, but yeah, I quite like the jersey. But I think what's going to be more relevant to what we're discussing is Claire is wearing a jersey as well. Do you want to?
yeah.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
the Players Against Hate jersey. They're an organisation that one of the things that they do is actually document different examples of like hate speech on the ice and try and use that in campaigns. But it has on the front no hate, and then where we skate on the back, and then the no racism little logos on the shoulders. And this is from their tournament last year. This is the jersey that they wore. The different teams, they had like a red based one, so the body was red, and then the sleeves were like black. But I like the black color better, so that's the one that I got. But yeah, the different teams wore different jerseys, and yeah, and could order them and support them that way. And I have a Pride Tape jersey coming in the mail as well, which I'm pretty excited about. And a Seattle Winter Classic jersey that I've been trying to track today because it was it had been delivered a couple of weeks ago. but the NHL shop is famously bad. And then a Travis Dermott Arizona Coyotes jersey coming, which I'll explain a little bit more about why I got his jersey in particular. Yeah, because there's a connection to the Pride tapes controversy there. But yes, so yeah,
And
this is the only one I have in my hot little hands at the moment, so it
yeah.
gets outings. But yeah.
Yeah, it's a particularly appropriate one. And I was just curious about that game. Like, was that NHL players or amateur players? Like, who
No,
was
I
playing in
think
that game?
it's like it's mainly amateur players. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I think I'm sure I've mentioned on the show a bunch. Yeah, playing ice hockey and watching ice hockey. But again, you can check out our other show for more on my hockey story if you want to hear about the Mighty Ducks movies. But I wanted to, yeah, I just pass it over to you. I know you've got a whole bunch of notes, so wherever you'd like to start off in terms of the hockey and politics stuff.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah. I
yeah.
mean, I guess connecting to our previous episode, I did want to raise an incident that happened with an Indigenous player in the playoffs last year. So that was kind of something that we didn't get a chance to talk about in the Friend of Species episode because it ran over time or we ran out of time. But yeah, there's in May 2023 during the Stanley Cup playoffs, which the Vegas Golden Knights won. One of their players, Zach Whitecloud, a commentator, apologised in the end because he compared Zach's last name to toilet paper during commentary on a goal that Zach had scored. Um, Whitecloud's believed to be the first member of the Sioux Valley Dakota Nation to play in the NHL. And on his day with the Stanley Cup, as a member of the winning team, he took it home to the Sioux Valley Dakota Nation, where a powwow was held in his honour. And there's some really beautiful footage of that powwow, and his family had made like these gorgeous ribbon skirts with like the Vegas Golden Knights design. Yeah, it was really really gorgeous. But yeah, that was just really a really really awful moment. Zach's a defenseman, so he doesn't often score goals. He scored this, incredible playoff goal, and then to have somebody racially vilify his surname like that. The footage of him talking about it after the game and stuff is really, really devastating because he's literally in tears. And I just kind of thought, yeah, it sort of really showed that these baked in attitudes still exist amongst commentators and so forth.
Hmm.
I know that you mentioned the what was it called? The Coach's Corner.
Yeah, Dear Coach's Corner was a propaganda song. Yeah.
Yeah, and there'd been really famous incidents of the person. Was it Dick someone?
Don McLean, I think.
Don McLean. Yeah,
Hmm.
like just constantly saying really awful, like racist shit for years and years and years. Yeah, before he eventually was forced to resign. But I mean, it's kind of like the Sam Newman stuff
Hmm.
in Australia, just these disgusting old players bringing these really feral, awful, I want to say outdated attitudes, but I don't think they are. If people can continually get away with saying this stuff, there must be an audience for it. But yeah, yeah, that was really devastating. Yeah, to see happen to Zach. Yeah,
Yeah, and I think like there is an audience for it. I think it's also probably has something to do with social media in terms of if they do something really offensive, it goes like viral, like even amongst like the left and progressive kind of outraged about it as well.
yeah,
Whereas just recently, ABC had a show called The Drum, which I hardly ever watched it, but it was like a sort of a chat show. But it seemed to be like fairly constructive kind of conversations. That's on ABC, our national broadcaster in Australia. Fairly like no one really blew up, and there was, I don't know, no one in blackface or anything like that, but like it's got cancelled because of poor ratings. And so I think, when they do have like, racist like Pauline Hanson on or whatever, it kind of goes around, people criticizing it, people spreading it around because people are criticizing it, like that sort of outrage I think maybe plays some role as well. Yeah, but I wanted to, yeah, you mentioned about that sort of environment of the NHL. And it is something I've looked into a bit for this show. So class and race in the NHL, I guess particularly race, I guess, but intersections with class as well. But yeah, it's definitely something I've noticed about the whiteness of hockey, and it's something I'd never really looked into. But I guess I just assumed it was because of like those intersections of race and class and discrimination against people of color historically and today in labor market and elsewhere, leading to, white people being more likely to have more money from be a higher class background, and therefore people who aren't white, like African American people, for example, like basketball is a much cheaper option. So it kind of makes sense from that point of view. And that was pretty much the explanation, but there was lots more to it as well. Just again
Mm.
from Googling, why is ice hockey so white? So yeah, definitely that intersection of race and class is part of it, but also the way in which that in a way becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like it creates an environment that is very white and is hostile to those who aren't white or men or straight, and these other issues as well. And yeah, there was a sketch on Saturday Night Live featuring Chance the Rapper, who was like in the sketch was a basketball reporter, but he didn't know anything about hockey. But he was like, it's lots of white dudes on skates running into each other at full speed. I don't get it. So there's that idea of like not seeing yourself represented and then not seeing it as for you, I guess. And that's kind of best case scenario. But then on the other side, as you've already touched on a bit, the idea that it's been a sport that has been openly hostile to women, people of color, queer people, etc. as well. So there's sort of both a like lack of representation, also those who do go, oh, it's not for me. There aren't people like me doing this, but I'll give it a go, kind of in a way being told in more or less subtle ways that this isn't for you, I guess.
Yeah, I mentioned before that I'd read two hockey biographies or autobiographies by two different Indigenous players, although one didn't actually play that many games in the NHL. I think he played a total of 12 games, but ended up coaching in the NHL. Um, and and I was like, maybe even with the Zach Whitecloud stuff happening last year or earlier this year, sorry, get confused with the different the seasons that stretched over 2 years. I'm like, it happened last season. Anyway, I was like, maybe I'm just really naive, but I was honestly shocked by some of the stories in those autobiographies. Just the horrendous racism. And sure, one of the players was playing like in the 1950s and one was playing in like the 80s, although actually maybe not even that long ago, because then he was coaching, um, actually in the like 2010s. So maybe he was playing in the early 2000s and I'm misremembering. But yeah, just the kind of things that were said by other players, other coaches, the fans, like the fan behaviours feral. And then yeah, in the process of researching for the freedom of species episode, I came across all these stories from people like JT Brown, who was a player, and is now what's called a color commentator on for Seattle Kraken, and then a couple of other black players who were involved in Black Lives Matter and stuff, and people throwing like bananas on the ice, chanting monkey and check. One of the players had experienced when he'd been playing in Europe. Just yeah, just feral stuff, and I was like, okay, yeah, I am really naive. Being a white person, obviously, I don't experience any of this, and you kind of being a leftist, I don't tend to get super sucked in by the kind of like linear narratives of progress and things are getting better and all that kind of crap. But yeah, I was just genuinely shocked at the things that some of these people have had to face. Like JT has a story from when he was a youth player, and it was racially abused by one of the other players on the team, and the officials, because they said they didn't hear it happen, refused to do anything about it. And the good thing in that story was that his coach was like, well, absolutely not. And they forfeited the game, and all, his teammates and coach just packed up and left and were like, if you're not going to address the racism, yeah, we're not going to play anymore. But I thought, with the class stuff, it was really, really interesting because, yeah, because even the few sort of black players or non-white players that do get through, there are, immense class issues. And with someone like JT Brown, his dad was a professional sports player, not a hockey player. I think he was a football player. So that's how someone like JT gets to play in the NHL. I had a look at, yeah, there was some really, really interesting stats available on the internet because I also did a bit of Googling. There's a fantastic article called The Intersecting State of Racial and Social Class Inequality in Hockey that's available on Medium. And it is not behind a paywall, but you do have to sign up to be able to read it. But I thought it was fascinating. Yeah, the literally, I mean, what the article was saying is that, people that do go on to play at an elite level are literally from families who can afford their success. And there's a quote from president of the Greater Toronto Hockey League who said that the game is no longer about a right to play. Now it's can you afford to pay? So they said in this article, considering that the average income in Canada is $33,000, it becomes crystal clear that hockey is not a sport for the average. For those households who earn the average income in Canada between 39 and $39,000, participation in hockey is 2.61%. That number skyrockets to 34.2% when looking at families who earn between $100,000 and $149,000 a year, and a total of 61% of all children who played hockey in Canada come from an upper middle class or upper class family whose household income's $100,000 or more. And this is from a Yahoo Sports article called The Privilege of Play. They said that 60% of hockey parents across Canada and the United States pay more than $5,000 a year, 41% spend between 5 and 10 grand, and 16% spend over 100 grand a year for their children to play the sports. 90% of parents surveyed said that they were worried about the financial impact that the sport was having on their families. 35% of parents take on personal debt, and 23% get a second job or work overtime so that their kids can play. And then there's also the time commitment. So 80% of parents said they spend on average 5 hours or more at hockey related activities, while 38% are at the rink for over 8 hours a week. Yeah. But, there's a really important quote, I think, which goes back to the point that you made before. So Bryant McBride, who's the Vice President of Business Development and the highest ranking minority executive in the history of the league, said it's more nuanced than cost. That's not the silver bullet. It's making the sport more welcoming and inclusive and accepting so that people feel welcome in that environment, be at a youth hockey rink or an NHL game. So it isn't just about class, but I just found those figures related to class incredibly, instructive.
Absolutely. And for those who aren't familiar with hockey, I guess there's lots of different costs involved in terms of like the ice time, like just paying to play or train, etc., because it's much more expensive than like a basketball court or something to maintain. I think particularly in places like Phoenix and those like places that are really set up for ice, but either way, just like maintaining that sort of frozen environment and all the costs associated, that means you pay a lot more than basketball, but also like more than Australian rules football or cricket. We've seen oval or whatever as well. So there's that cost. You've got like equipment all over your body. So lots of different equipment. The sticks break a lot as well. And so that's another cost. So there's just, yeah, a lot more cost than many, I'd say just about all other sports, but definitely most other sports. Maybe some of some of the other snow sports would also be quite expensive too, which is perhaps why they may also be very white as well. But but yeah, a lot more expensive than many sports anyway. Yeah, for
And
all
that
the
was the really incredible thing about reading about these Indigenous players and how they got into playing and the kind of equipment that they learned how to play. So one of them used to dull their skates when they started playing at the higher levels because he was just not used to playing on skates.
uh,
Yeah, and people were given like sticks and basically told, do not break them. Like, we cannot afford to replace them. This is your one and only hockey stick. And if you
yeah.
watch the NHL players, like sometimes they break their sticks when they get cranky, they just get
Yeah.
handed new sticks all the time. And then the way that people created ice rinks in really cold environs was, going, getting water and pouring it on top of the snow and just doing that for hours until they had their own sort of backyard rink.
Mm.
Yeah, it was quite incredible, the ingenuity. But yeah, I mean, I was chatting about it with a friend of mine who's really into soccer, and we were just talking about how, some of the best players in the world started off as barefooted kids playing, in
Mm.
favelas in Brazil on
Mm.
like dirt with, one single soccer player between the whole community, one single soccer ball between the whole community. And there doesn't seem to be that kind of ability to make inroads like that into a really expensive sport like ice hockey, particularly these days, where, some of the best players have these incredible coaching. What are they called? Clinics that children can attend, but they're like tens of thousands of dollars for children to attend. But basically, if you get the opportunity to do that, then you've already sort of got a foot in the door. I mean, one of the things I love about Zach Whitecloud is he was an undrafted player and he's gone on to have incredible success with the Vegas Golden Knights. So there are these really sweet stories about people still managing with raw talent to
Mhm.
make their ways onto teams. But yeah, it does feel really few and far between. And there's a few sort of legacy families hanging around who's, the dad and the mum. With the Hughes family, the mum was a really incredible ice hockey player, and Luke and Quinn both wear her number, which I really like.
Mhm.
They're both number 43 for their respective teams. But yeah, it's kind of this legacy family, they just, yeah, it came from, had dads who earned millions and millions of dollars playing in the sport and are able to give these kids who are incredibly talented, but yeah, a leg up that other people just don't have. I mean, in terms of race, the NHL actually released its first ever diversity inclusion report in no less than 2022. So, incredible. But yeah, 83.6 of employees across the NHL and its teams are white. They found 4.17% were Asian, 3.74 black, 3.71 Latinx, and 0.5% Indigenous, and about 2.5% opted not to answer. 65.44% of internships and fellowships at the NHL are white, and 69.6% of human resources departments are white. 61.86% of workers around the NHL identify as men, and 36.81% identify as women. Those numbers change dramatically when it comes to marketing, branding, and content, where it's about like a 50-50 split between male and female employees. 4 in 10 NHL fans in the US are women. 93% of the NHL's workforce identifies as straight or heterosexual. 1.5% is bi, 1.1% is gay, and 0.8% is lesbian. Although that's very much the NHL and not the women's team. And currently there are 54 active players who are Arab, Asian, Black, Latinx, or Indigenous, which makes up roughly 7% of the league. So 93% of the players in the league are white.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's definitely all those classes you touched on, but as I touched on as well, that idea of the self-perpetuating lack of diversity was something that
Yes.
came up in something I was reading. So when nearly all the gatekeepers are white men, you just get a lot more white men. And yeah, similar kind of statement was when a potential new fan or new player turns on a game and sees almost exclusively straight white men talking about the game, almost exclusively straight white men, coached by almost exclusively straight white men, officiated by almost exclusively straight white men, they don't see themselves represented. So there's that side of it. Also, the historical ongoing. So I was also reading an article, this was from The Conversation, about racialized people not being allowed to participate in dominant amateur hockey leagues as well. So Black communities created the Coloured Hockey League, was what they used at the time, which existed from 1895 until the 1930s. So there was that like more formal segregation, but they also interviewed or reported on a player, Larry Kwong, a Chinese Canadian, and saying that there was lots of players out there trying to cut his head off just because he was Chinese, and the bigger the league, the bigger the axe they used. And yeah, they also raised the first NHL player in the NHL, Canadian named Willie O'Reilly, made his debut in 1958 and dealt with racism, unfair calls from referees, unwarranted aggression from other hockey players. Yeah, having things thrown at him while he was playing. So again, there's lack of representation. There's also hostility to those who are outside that dominant representation. I should say, for clarification, I'm also a straight white man, so I'm not contributing to that anyway, and I'm not experiencing it, which I guess is in a way I kind of mentioned before of sport being something like it's good to engage in non-political things, but I think being a straight white male enables me to view it as a non-political thing as well. So there's that too, although I definitely like, I remember not playing hockey. There was a couple of years I had off. This was back in Perth, Australia, the other side of Australia. I didn't play for 2 years, and then I came back and it was about like 5 seconds before someone gave a homophobic slur, for example. So even though I'm not directly affected, I definitely yeah, notice it, and they're definitely bothered by it, but obviously it's going to be much deeper for those who are directly affected that. The final point I'll make as well around this issue as well is they also mentioned the enduring Canadian problem of ignoring racism as well as a sort of a thing as well. And I guess I have that sort of, I think I've definitely heard criticism of that, so I don't totally accept it. But there's an idea of Canada being the nicer USA and kind of less racism, and perhaps that's true, like less racism, but there's still a lot of racism, and that idea of that sort of nicer reputation being used to sort of deny or ignore the racism that exists as well.
Um, on that note, there's a really incredible book called Rehearsals for Living, which is written by Robin Maynard, who's a Black Canadian author, and Leanne Badasa Somoge Simpson, who's an Anishinaabe author, and that's a series of I don't it's a series of letters that they wrote each other, starting in about 2020, I think. I don't think they went as far back as 2019, but they started writing in 2020, during Black Lives Matter, and yeah, and COVID, or at least when the world responded to COVID, because I really, as an immunocompromised disabled person, I get really frustrated with people pretending COVID's over. COVID is not over. But yes, yeah, some really, really enlightening as a non-Turtle Island person, really enlightening conversations around the particular forms that Canadian racism take. Yeah, and I think, that can also be a bit of a discourse in Australia and then also in Aotearoa, is everybody's always like, oh, at least we're not as bad as that settler nation. In Australia likes to say, oh, well, at least we're not as bad as the United States. And then Aotearoa, loves to say, well, at least we're not as bad as Australia. And it's like, actually, if you look at statistics around the way that Indigenous people are treated across those settler colonial states, they're almost identical. The rates of Indigenous incarceration for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here in Maori and Aotearoa are equally as bad and on par with the ways in which Indigenous people are incarcerated in the US, which is actually at higher rates than what the black population is. And we know how bad the rates of incarceration are for black people, but less spoken about is the way that Indigenous people are incarcerated. So yeah, I would highly recommend that book if people want to look into that further. But I think that kind of, if you're happy for us to segue onto the next topic, I think that actually
Absolutely.
really organically leads us into the next conversations with theme nights, right? So what
Hmm.
the hell happened with theme nights? Because they were held up by the NHL as being, these, what's like exemplars or these, I don't want to say gestures because I feel like they were supposed to be a little bit more, but these efforts towards, bringing more diversity and inclusion. There are also feral theme nights, right? It must be acknowledged. There's like military appreciation night, like, whatever. But depending on the teams and depending on the areas, there was like, a Black history kind of theme night, an Indigenous theme night, and then obviously most famously the Pride theme nights. So in terms of the Pride ones, and this kind of becomes ironic later, but the San Jose Sharks are believed to be the first NHL team to host a Pride themed game when they hosted an LGBT night in 2011 against the Dallas Stars. However, apparently the Sharks were a bit reluctant hosts. There weren't any in-game activities to celebrate the community, and the Sharks players were not involved. And they sort of said, a spokesperson for the team sort of said, there's no huge promotion. This is just another group coming to our game, buying a block of tickets to sit with each other. So, that was kind of the first time that, that there was kind of like this idea of a Pride night, but it was certainly.
It's like we don't want to exclude that market. We're missing that market share. Let's bring them in and get their money, basically.
Yeah, but not acknowledge them, and we feel kind of awkward that people are making a thing out of this.
Out of
Um,
the thing we're making a thing of. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Um, yeah, so one of the people who helped launch Outsports, which is a really useful resource for all things queer and in the sporting community, said that he actually thinks that the credit belongs mostly to Brendan Burke, who was the son of a long-time NHL executive Brian Burke. Brendan came out in 2009 while working with the Miami University's men's hockey program. And then, unfortunately, shortly after coming out, he was tragically killed in an automobile accident. Um, yeah, and it was really in his memory that any kind of like Pride nights started to happen. So, Brian Burke, his father, and brother Patrick Burke founded the You Can Play project in 2012 in his memory. So in April 2013, the NHL and the You Can Play project became official partners, making the NHL the first major American pro sports league to partner with an LGBT outreach organisation on a large scale. And so originally, the NHL was ahead of its peers in North American sports. So this is where the irony comes in. 2017, February, the San Jose Sharks announced that they would use Pride-themed hockey takes on their sticks. Sorry, for a Hockey's for Everyone game. So they were in 2013 sort of being these reluctant hosts, and then in 2017 they became official hosts. And by the 2017-2018 season, all 31 NHL teams were participating in a Hockey is for Everyone theme night in their home arenas, with most teams welcoming in members of the LGBTQIA plus Two-Spirit community for those games. The following season, the Canucks had a handful of players wearing Pride-themed jerseys with rainbow-coloured name and bars for their Hockey is for Everyone night in 2019. And then in the years following that, more teams started wearing Pride-themed jerseys for warm-ups, not for the actual games themselves, but for the warm-ups.
And when you said a few players, does that mean only a few players chose to do it? Like it wasn't the whole team? Is that
Yeah, it
right?
wasn't the
Yeah.
whole team, but
Okay.
it's become a whole team thing by about 2022, 2023 season, but for only about 14 teams in the league.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. So then we get to 2023. Yeah, and things really start going down the toilet. So early 2023, in January, Flyers, so Philadelphia Flyers defenseman Ivan now Provorov, I think I've pronounced his surname properly, citing his Russian Orthodox religion as the reason, said he did not want to participate in the pre-game warm-ups where the team wore Pride-themed jerseys and used sticks wrapped in Pride tape. And then this is again where the irony comes in. In March, the San Jose Sharks goalie, James Reimer, boycotted pre-game warm-ups on saying that the team's decision to wear Pride-themed jerseys in support of the queer community runs counter to his religious beliefs. He said in a statement that the decision was based on his Christian beliefs, adding that he always strived to treat everyone with respect and that members of the queer community should be welcome in hockey, which seems to contradict his actions. But
But
anyway,
I'm boycotting this event, which is trying to do, like, in some small way, work towards that goal. Yeah. Yeah.
conclusion,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. And then following that, the New York Rangers opted not to wear their Pride Night jerseys or use Pride stick tape, despite previously advertising that. In total, 7 players, which I think somebody said was like less than 1% or about 1% of the number of players in the league, refused to wear rainbow jerseys, mostly saying it went against their religion, although others, particularly the Russian players, said that they were concerned about retaliation from Russian authorities for participating in queer-friendly events when they went home, which I think is, I don't know if it's a legitimate concern, but it is definitely something that does need to be taken into considerations. Like people have family and friends back home, and sometimes activities that they participate in or are mandated to participate in potentially could have, flow-on effects, given how deeply homophobic, the Russian state is at the moment. So in total, 3 teams, including the New York Rangers, the Minnesota Wild, and the Chicago team, cancelled their Pride Night warm-ups. Yeah, and I thought this was, I wanted to tell this story because I thought this was really, really sad. So the Wild flew in Minnesota native Jack Jablonski for their Pride team. Jablonski was paralysed when he was playing hockey in high school and now works for the LA Kings. In 2022, he revealed he's gay, and the Wild had even designed a Jabs patch that was going to be worn on the Pride warm-up jerseys. When all was said and done, Jablonski was the only person who ended up wearing the jersey since the team elected not to don the Pride sweaters for that game. So I just thought that was really, really tragic that this person that they had decided to honour then, when they cancelled the Pride Night acknowledgements, I mean, it was still called the Pride Night, but they didn't wear their warm-up jerseys, didn't wear the patch. Yeah, ended up being the only person. So, yeah, it really feels like a real slap in the face to the queer community when you read stories like that. So from these 7 players and 3 teams, this controversy spilled into the summer when the league's Board of Governors implemented new guidelines that restricted players from wearing specialty themed jerseys, and that decision came out in June. NHL Commissioner Bettman, Gary, is that his first name?
Not
Don't know.
sure. Hmm.
He's evil. Anyway, Bettman said the jerseys had become a distraction and he wanted the focus to be directed on grassroots initiatives undertaken by each club. So the NHL now prohibits players from wearing specialty jerseys, masks, stickers, decals, or tape for theme nights. The NHL also put out a communication to clubs which said that players were welcome to object being in close proximity to people or groups who they might consider to be associated with causes that they don't support. A leaked memo read, players shall not be put in a position of having to demonstrate, or where they may be appearing to demonstrate, personal support for any special initiatives. A factor that may be considered in this regard includes, for example, whether a player or players is required to be in close proximity to any groups or individuals visibly or otherwise clearly associated with such special initiatives. So that's pretty gross. Like,
Yes, yeah. Yeah.
visibly trans and queer people don't come near our players, basically. Or, yeah, that's really gross. I think it's summed up by the Edmonton Oilers player Zach Simon, who said that the decision was disappointing and that it impacted on more than just the Pride Night jerseys, but other causes the NHL supports. And this then went into the ban on Pride-themed tapes on the sticks. So this was the decision that I was talking about literally the day before the NHL this season started, or maybe it was the preseason games. But anyway, the day before something started this year, they announced a ban on using pride-coloured tape on people's sticks. So, yeah, that was kind of this extra slap in the face. It was like, not only are we getting rid of the special jerseys, teams can still have theme nights and they still are having theme nights. I think this weekend is the Jersey's Pride Night. The New Jersey Devils Pride Night is this weekend. And what happens then is players wear the jerseys as they walk into the stadium. So normally they would be photographed wearing their spiffy suits, which is a whole nother conversation around class and grossness in the NHL, that they're forced to wear like thousands and thousands of dollars worth of suits to show up. Oh, it's just such a weird thing. But anyway, let's not get to that rabbit hole. But yeah, instead of wearing their suits, they'll wear the special themed jerseys to just into the arena itself. They're not allowed to wear them for warm-ups, and that's where, if people want to listen to our previous episode, our Freedom of Species episode, we talked about the controversy around Marc-Andre Fleury's mask that he had designed by a local Minnesota Indigenous community member to wear for his team's Indigenous night. And he was told that if he wore it for warm-ups, he would be fined. And he did. So, and I haven't heard of a fine coming down, but yeah, like, good on you, Fleury. Like, yes. And that kind of comes where the direct action comes in. So this is a good news story. So we have the Pride tape ban, and people have spoken out about that, including people like Connor McDavid, Scott Lawton, and Brad Marchand.
And McDavid's probably about the best player in the league, right? Or at least right up there, right? Yeah.
McDavid, I've seen nicknamed as McJesus. He hasn't been having a great season, but I think he's started firing on all cylinders now. He's sort of kind of pulled it back. But yeah, he plays for the Edmonton Oilers, and they are famously really, really supportive of queer initiatives. Their former captain was the first ever Edmonton Oilers player to march in Edmonton Pride,
Oh, cool.
and he participates in the annual queer and trans tournament that happens in North America that includes players from all over the world. I think some of the we have the Harbour Lights and the Southern Lights, which are the queer leagues in Australia, and some of their players are planning to go over. I don't know if it's being hosted in Canada or the US this next year, but they're going to go over for that tournament, and he goes to that as well as Luke Prokop, who's the only out gay NHL or person with an NHL contract. He's not an NHL player, but yeah,
Wow.
they both are really, really supportive of this fantastic queer and trans tournament that happens each year. But anyway,
I never thought I'd say I should go for the Oilers for progressive reasons, but there you
I know,
go.
right? Like I could never go with for them because of their name, but yeah, like they are famously really, really great allies.
Cool.
But on October the 21st, Arizona defenseman Travis Dermott, the person who I mentioned before, I'm getting one of his jersey, he used Pride themed tape on his stick during a game against Anaheim. And this was like, yeah, calling the league's bluff, right? So you ban Pride tape, and like I cannot tell you the hysteria that was going on in the queer hockey teams, like yeah, like and on Twitter when not the queer hockey teams, but the queer hockey community, which does include people who do play on the queer teams. But yeah, like we were in in hysterics when we spotted it on his stick. You know, there was all these great memes floating around on Twitter, like "We see you" with like the eyeballs and stuff. So Travis told reporter Craig Morgan that the LGBTQIA Two-Spirit Plus community means a lot to him, and that the NHL Pride tape ban had been really emotionally difficult for him. He said, "I'd be lying if I said I hadn't shed tears about this on multiple occasions." So yeah, it's definitely something that I'm really passionate about. And I think this is incredible on a number of different levels. So Dermott has been, he doesn't post very much on social media, but he has posted a couple of times some queer content. So for Pride, he's posted stuff with him wearing like Pride shoes and things like this. He's in a relationship with a woman. I assume, I mean, he's married, you know, he's got children. I think he would consider himself an ally, not a member of the community. But what he's shared before is that he has somebody very, very close to him who has come out to him, but not come out publicly. And Dermott, attributes that to the fact that there is a deeply homophobic culture. And so he's very much in interviews, he said, "I'm using my privilege that I have as being, this visible person to make a statement about queer inclusion and queer rights from this position because I feel this obligation as somebody with privilege to be really open and really, really advocate for inclusion." So I just love him. And then also on top of that is that in this deeply fucking sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed
You
to
can swear as much as you like. Yep, yeah, it's not going out in the radio. So yep. In fact, if we don't, I think our episodes are automatically marked as explicit. So if we don't swear, it's kind of false advertising. So I appreciate it.
In this super macho sport, he's publicly saying that he's cried about the Pride tape ban. I was just like, oh my God, you are just the most delightful human. And it also is worth mentioning that this guy had spent the majority of the previous season out with a really serious head injury. He used to play for the Maple Leafs, I think. He'd had a terrible concussion, and then he'd just been let go at the end of the season. The Maple Leafs didn't renew his contract, so he was an unrestricted free agent. He's been signed on a one year two-way contract with the Coyotes. So, which means he can either a two-way contract means you either play in the NHL or you play in the AHL for the farm team because you're not good enough to play in the NHL. And there's a whole bunch of rules about you have once you've played a certain number of games in the NHL, then you still get the NHL level salary. But if you don't qualify for the NHL and don't play in the team, then you get an AHL salary, which is much reduced. So, he's only on a 1-year contract with the Coyotes coming back from injury. So he's not someone like Connor McDavid, who, is, as you said, like famously one of the best players in the league at the moment. He's this, like fairly powerless, fairly precarious member of the team. And the team had said how incredibly impressed they were with him during training camps, and he had made the team and he has been consistently playing on the team, although he did spend about 7 weeks out with a ironically immediately after this game, like I think the very next game or during that game, he got an injury that wiped him out for like 7 weeks. So I've been desperately trawling the injured list for when Dermott might come back. I was like, when is he coming back? But yeah, he's back now. He's playing with the team. Anyway, so what happened with this is he used the tape on his stick. It went viral. I think he said he had spoken to the team. He had given them a heads up, not asked for permission, but just said, "Hey, I'm going to do this," because I think that's probably a courtesy. And they hadn't stopped him, which is good. And we were like, what is going to happen? Everyone's waiting with bated breath. And so what happened was a couple of days after that, the league released a statement saying, after consultation with the Players Association and the Inclusion Coalition, players will now have the option to voluntarily represent social causes with their stick tape throughout the season. So that was fantastic, although, and definitely a result of Dermott's direct action. I'm not trying to take anything away from him, but I have seen this. There's this incredible young woman who I think is Briley Crystal's granddaughter. She does all this like sports reporting on TikTok and usually just lesbian stuff, but she was like, no, I have to cover this story because this is huge. And she went away and read like the NHL's own rules, and actually in the NHL's own rule book, it says players can use tape of any color on their sticks during warm-ups and games. And so so the league basically shot themselves in the foot by banning pride tape and they're not changing their own rule book. And so this is not taking anything away at all from Dermott's direct action, but there was no way they could have fined him under their own rules. And good on the Players Association and the Diversity Committee for assumedly standing up and advocating for both his rights as a worker under the rules, and then also, the principles of diversity and inclusion. But yeah, that's the Pride tape and the theme night saga. So it does really, really feel like the NHL has gone backwards, honestly. As a queer supporter of ice hockey, it's been pretty friggin' depressing. And then to see a player like Travis Dermott come out and take a stand on it was really, really encouraging. There was, a lot of conversations on different sporting blogs and stuff is who is going to be the person to challenge it, and no one would have guessed it was Travis Dermott. But yeah, we thought that players like McDavid would probably wait for their Pride nights and then do something during the Pride night warm-ups. But yeah, all props to Dermott for forcing the issue on October the 21st.
Yeah, as you say, particularly the situation he was in as well, of having less sort of power, I guess, in a sense. But yeah, I also, on the suit issue, it does remind me back when I was playing, this was probably about 20 years ago now, but in our amateur league, someone in our team was like, we should all, I didn't think it was necessarily wear suits, but like we should all be dressed up to the game, like an amateur level.
Yeah.
But he did say that, I'm not sure if it was a coincidence or not, but I was wearing, it was really popular at the time, but they were like the zip pants where you'd have like, you could turn them to shorts or pants. And I was wearing like one pair of like the top of the shorts or pants was one color and the bottom like the zip was from another color. So he did announce that like pretty much right after I wore them. So I'm not sure that was coincidence, but yeah, I guess on a more serious note, I think like those notions of having like queer stick tape or pride stick tape or jerseys or whatever, like in a way they could be dismissed as like tokenistic in a way, but then it's like if we can't even do the token things, and it says it's like how far behind we are. But also the quote from the NHL person about like the like special groups as well. And I think that
Yeah.
sort of reinforced that like hockey is like a straight white man thing. And
Yeah.
if you're like if you don't fit that, you're like a special group who might, conditionally be allowed in or not. But it's like it shouldn't be viewed as a special group. It should just be viewed, obviously, ideally, of like lots of different people play hockey of different ethnicities and genders and sexual orientations, etc. And like we're all part of the community, like to view, yeah, I think that notion of specialness kind of reinforces that hegemony of those who are straight in that case.
Yeah, and to say that it's a distraction
Mm,
is
yeah.
a really gross thing to hear. Um, I think it's also worth mentioning that those special theme nights are used to raise money. And so part of the the players wearing the jerseys for the warm-ups is that those jerseys would then be auctioned and the money would be donated to local organizations related to that particular theme. So assumedly for like military appreciation night, they donate money to various veterans groups, which, support the soldiers, not the wars. Yeah, because there's obviously, a deep recognition amongst most leftists that, the individual cannon fodder that are sent to fight these imperialist wars, are then left with, horrific and debilitating, mental and physical disabilities often and totally discarded by mainstream society. So, I do kind of like appreciate at least that they were raising money for veterans groups. If I wish that it had been named like the anti-war night rather than the military appreciation night. But yeah, like the Indigenous night would raise money for local Indigenous organisations. The queer nights would raise, or the Pride nights would raise money for local queer charities and youth organisations and different inclusion um, you know, attempts and initiatives is the word I'm looking for, initiatives. So yeah, it's just and like the mask that Marc-Andre Fleury wore. I think I gave him the wrong name before, so apologies. Hopefully he'll never hear this before. But the mask that he wore raised $35,000 at auction, and in total, the auction raised $66,000 in support of the Minnesota Wild Foundation and the American Indian Family Center in Minnesota. So yeah, this was a really significant fundraiser for local communities, and people are concerned with the players now no longer wearing the warm-up jerseys. Like it's optional whether they wear the warm-up jerseys into the arena. They definitely are not allowed to wear them on the ice. But that's actually going to decrease the value of those jerseys when they're auctioned. That people, I don't know, like wanted a bit of player sweat in them or something for an extra layer of authenticity and excitement about the jerseys. So yeah, it's going to have an impact upon all these charitable organisations that the NHL was purporting to previously have some kind of commitment to. And it is it does feel really directed at the Pride Nights because this was in response to it, and they've taken the approach of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and being a bit like dishonest by just saying now we're getting rid of all theme nights because they're a distraction, um, when it's clear that it's directed at the Pride Nights. But, on another level, I'm kind of like, well, I'm sort of glad it's affecting everyone and hopefully pissing off everyone. Because, yeah, if it had just been them getting rid of the Pride Nights with the way that, you know, anti-queer and anti-trans stuff is going in America, I can kind of see people just being like, oh, yeah, sure, that is distracting. And yeah, we don't want them associated with our sport. Even though, as I said, it was only 7 players who refused to wear the Pride Night jerseys. But yes.
Yeah.
And this even continued on to the stickers. So Logan Thomas, who's a Vegas Golden Knights goalie, he wasn't allowed to put a cancer ribbon on his helmet for the team's Hockey Fights Cancer Night. And we're just like, people are just like, this is getting ridiculous. Like, who is the NHL in that case worried about offending the pro cancer lobby? Like, people were tweeting about this,
Yeah, yeah.
and the pro cancer lobby.
Both sides are equally valid. Yeah, yeah,
And I
yeah.
think I can't remember the details, but I'm pretty sure Logan Thompson had like a fairly close family member, if not one of his parents, die recently of cancer, and that was why he wanted to put the decal on his goalie mask for that night, and they said absolutely not. And so, like we spoke about in the Freedom of Species episode, what's happened now with the Seattle goalie, or one of the Seattle goalies, Philip Grubauer, is that he had a local Indigenous artist, who's a Tulalip tribal member, design a mask, a goalie mask for him that he debuted at their Indigenous theme night, but because he planned to wear the mask for multiple games, he was allowed to wear the mask and not face a fight, whereas Fleury's mask was just literally designed to be worn only for the warm-ups because he wasn't the starting goalie that night, but only for the warm-ups for their Indigenous theme night and then be auctioned off to raise money. And Grubauer also wore a Hockey Fights Cancer mask for the entirety of October without attracting any controversy around that. But again, it seems because he wears them for a month long, he's allowed to do that. But if it's just for the theme night. So it's just these ridiculous, like, what are your rules, and why are you doing this? Like, I can't, like, yeah, it was beautiful. Like, when Travis wore the pride tape, it was so exciting. Like, people went absolutely crazy. We're all so excited. And then I can't imagine how much pride, like, the local Indigenous people feel in Seattle when they see Grubauer's mask. Like, it's so beautiful. And I was like really touched, and, I'm super, super white. So it doesn't have the same meaning for me. But to see him skate out in that mask was a really beautiful gesture. Yeah, and I just don't understand. I mean, I kind of do, but I don't understand the mentality of making sports less inclusive. It feels so mean-spirited, and regressive. And it's kind of ironic because in some of the hockey romances I read, the NHL commissioner is always this big bad guy, right? And then I go and read the Goodreads reviews because I'm always curious what other people think of the books I've read. And they're always like, oh, it seems a bit over the top that the NHL commissioner is written to be this evil guy, and like, surely in real life. And I'm like, Bettman at the moment is honestly proving every queer hockey romance author right about how evil the NHL commissioner is, because he's just behaving in the most, yeah, feral, disgusting manner. Yeah, and just winding back all these. I can't even imagine the man and the brother of that young man who died. yeah, I can't remember which one was Brian and Brendan, but yeah, and who's, memory was the inspiration for You Can Play being started. How they must feel to see this regression of all the activities that were supposed to be in, their son and brother's memory. What it just must feel like to see Batman rolling this all back, and terming it a distraction.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I also, even those players, you mentioned like 7 players objecting to it. It's like kind of like, well, we're a minority. We're being persecuted. What about our, you know what I mean? Like it's kind
Yeah,
of like they're like, but that's what it's about. It's about people who might be a minority but need to be included. Yeah, it's yeah, but very, yeah, it's yeah, all ridiculous. I just wanted to maybe bring in an example from cricket, if that's all right, which kind of is
yeah,
very similar discussions around Palestine. So Usman Khawaja, who's an Australian cricket player, he before the first Test match in Perth, which was yeah recently, he wrote on his shoes at a training match, "Freedom is a human right, and all lives are equal." And basically, that was in response to Palestine, and he's posted he's a Muslim person as well, which is quite unusual in Australian cricket, which is also very white as well. Obviously, he can be Muslim and white, but he's not. But yeah, anyway, so basically, yeah, much the same discussions as in hockey as well. So basically, they were saying the ICC, like the International Cricket something, the board who governs cricket, forbid political statements during international matches. But they have allowed players to take the knee during Black Lives Matter protests, which is good, but political, right? Like, so in the end, basically, he didn't do that because they said that he would be fined and the team would be fined significantly. And instead, he wore a black armband during the game to like for the people in Palestine, which was again a really powerful statement. And the fact that he was the only one, I thought was both sort of in a way it made it powerful because it was kind of him taking a stand, but it was kind of a shame that the other players didn't join in. They're playing Pakistan as well, which is a predominantly Muslim country. Not that you have to be Muslim. Anyone who's concerned about human rights and oppression and settler colonialism should be, for Palestine and concerned about it. But no one else joined in. But yeah, and Usman Khawaja was saying like he's in full support of the Black Lives Matter movement, and he supported that stance as well. And yeah, it's really sort of yeah, arbitrary. They're blaming that they're sort of singling out this stance. Fortunately, I guess similar to the hockey example, the Australian captain, Pat Cummins, who's actually relatively progressive, and apparently there's a bit of a divide there. Like people think he can't be the captain because he drives an electric car and is concerned about climate change, and there sort of seems to be a little bit like a left-right divide in the Australian cricket team. That's kind of got a little bit more left or progressive, but he said he supported the stance. He said you want everyone to bring their own individual self to the team. And what was on the shoes, all lives are equal. I mean, I support that. I think that's not very divisive. I don't think anyone can really have too many complaints about that. And that's what Usman Khawaja was saying, that he was getting, the statements were so general, so sort of banal is probably like too critical, but it's like, there was nothing anti-Israel even. It was just very much saying like, yeah, for human rights. And yet he's got so much pushback, of course, on social media and elsewhere that he's offensive and all these kinds of things. But yeah, I was glad just on a personal level that he had a good game because I think that would have been, trying to play with all that going on. So I was glad that he made lots of runs that game. But yeah, it kind of was a shame that it was a lone statement and no one joined in as well. There's been similar things in cricket. Mohammad Rizwan, who's a Pakistani cricketer, made 100 runs during the recent Cricket World Cup. And he dedicated his innings, his runs to brothers and sisters in Gaza. And yeah, there was calls for him to be banned and all these kinds of things as well. And yeah, in 2014, the global governing body, the ICC, they banned England all-round cricketer Moeen Ali, again, who's also a Muslim, from wearing wristbands saying "Save Gaza" and "Free Palestine." And yeah, I think. Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, literally, like, just I was eating lunch just before I came to record, and the Australian player that you mentioned, he's been fined for the black armband.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Wow.
it's literally
Yeah.
like just been announced like 2 or 3 hours ago. He's been
Wow.
for wearing
Okay. So it'll
black.
be a couple of days after when this actually goes out. But yeah,
Yeah,
that's a real shame. And I just really hate this idea of we're not allowing politics, but like we'll allow the Black Lives Matter. And it's kind of I just feel like that whole political thing is more, it's always about we're not allowing a certain kind of politics. Like everything is political. I just feel like the Black Lives Matter movement made so much gains during that time. It became sort of accepted in a mainstream sense. It became sort of the dominant politics, at least to some extent, even if it was in a token way, and there was still, over representations in prison and all these kinds of issues. But at least sort of that rhetoric became dominant, and then it became not political, and also as if having like military involved in the game is not political as well. So yeah, I just think those. Yeah, that it's just such bullshit that calls for not be political. It's always politics. It's just a matter of which politics. That's really the only question.
yeah, definitely. I mean, even like I get really, I mean, I don't go to heaps of Australian games, but I do get really like grossed out at, the national anthem being sung at the beginning of every single hockey game. Like,
Hmm.
and sometimes it's two because it's a Canadian team and a US team
Yeah,
playing.
yeah,
They're
yeah.
going to bang both out, and it's like, wow, this is just like massive jingoism and patriotism. And even when they had the exhibition matches in Australia, they asked like they played the Australian national anthem and then I think just the American because both the teams were American, the American national anthem, and they say to people like, "Please take off your hats and rise," like it was on the broadcast, and I was like, "Ew." I went to the AFLW grand final a couple of years ago with a friend and one of their young children, and they started playing the Australian national anthem, and me and my friend were like, "We don't stand for that shit." But I remember her like looking over at her son and saying, "You don't have to stand up. Like, obviously, you can if you want to, because like there's a lot of peer pressure, but you don't have to stand up." And I was like, "Yeah, good. We're modeling like the proper kind of level of respect to yeah, pay to these deeply colonial, horrible, jingoistic, imperialist songs." Yeah, but yeah, it's just, yeah, like to pretend that there's no politics in that, like playing the national anthem before the game, like really, and like you said, turning on a sport and just seeing like all white people behind the bench or white people on the rink, or white people everywhere, like the commentators, etc., etc. I mean, like I was saying, it's but in our freedom of species episode, one of the reasons I chose the Seattle team to support was because of who they are, kind of as a. This kind of sounds gross, but like as an entity, I was going to say a corporate entity, but I was like, let's just skip the corporate. But they are a deeply corporate entity, but they are really have some progressive gloss on their socials. They really, when there was Seattle Pride as an organization, they marched in the Seattle Pride parade. And JT Brown, who I mentioned before, who's a Tampa Bay Lightning player, he retired when he was offered a commentary contract by the Seattle Kraken. And I feel really like, yeah, I have a lot. The Seattle team gets a lot of like good vibes from me, or like because they actually chose to employ somebody who'd been really outspoken since 2017 alone, really outspoken about race and racism. And his experiences in the NHL and protesting about racial issues in the NHL. And I was like, actually, that's really impressive. You would expect, given how awful and toxic and racist the NHL is, that nobody would touch him with a 10-foot pole after retirement. Like,
Yeah.
and he said to his family and to his wife, the response to me taking a stand about this in 2017 is going to be awful. And he received death threats. So it was, but yeah, I was like, actually, to see Seattle hire him, I mean, he's great. He's a fantastic commentator. It's not like they're doing him any favors. Like he earned that job. But the fact that they were willing to consider him, I was like, that's actually a real vote in your favor because I would not have expected anyone to consider hiring him post retirement. So that's really good to see. And then the first game back after the Pride Tape ban had been announced, he wore a suit, a really incredible blue suit. The photos are on his social media if anyone wants to go have a look. And the lining, which he flashed, it was all rainbows.
Oh,
And
cool.
he and his wife and kids marched as part of the Seattle team, and his wife's very openly queer on social media. So yeah, it just feels really great to support an organisation like that with people like JT and Lexi involved who are really really outspoken. Yeah, and people were again like frothing on socials, like look at what JT's wearing. He's wearing rainbows. You know, it felt in the light of the Pride ban, a very very conscious decision on him and his family's behalf that he would wear a rainbow lined suit to the
Yeah.
first Seattle game of the season. It was really, really beautiful to see. And, you know, reading some of the interviews with Travis Dermott after he broke the ban with the pride tape on his stick, he said, "I can tell you how much this means to people. I will show you," to one of the reporters, "I will show you my DMs
Mm.
and all the messages I've been getting from people." And I was like, that is really lovely to hear because he doesn't update his social media very often. I think his last post was from like May and it's now December. But to know that he'd seen all of us tagging him on social media and saying thank you, that was a really, really lovely thing to hear that he'd seen all that and that he knew how much it meant to the community, the action that he took. And, you know, I'm sure with this cricket player as well, like if people can give him some love, I saw his TikTok the other day talking about the action that he'd taken and you know gave him some kudos on social media. So yeah, if people can do that, I think that would be really good in light of the fine that he's now facing from the ICC.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did like retweet and said good on him for taking a stance on the issue. And yeah, obviously people with big followings like that don't necessarily see every comment, but they're going to
Yeah,
get a massive negative comments, unfortunately, as much as it
yeah,
was very, as the Australian captain said, who unfortunately didn't join him, but at least said like good on him for doing it. So totally like just saying everyone should have human rights, basically. But nevertheless, he'll get a lot of pushback for it, I guess, because yeah, sort of the Israeli state doesn't act as though that is true, so it kind of makes sense in some ways. But yeah, there's going to be a massive negative comment. So yeah, to add a few positive, as many positive as we can, to amass as much as they won't see everyone is a good thing to do. I was going to say as well, the commentator, I think that's particularly good that he sort of stuck his neck out for queer rights when he'd already faced so much backlash for speaking out against black. Like, could be, I'll just keep my head underwater and just kind of like, yeah, not stick my head out. It was good that he's still continuing to take a stand on social justice issues as well. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I was going to make one more point about football, actually, which was around The Voice. So the AFL supported The Voice, Indigenous Voice of Parliament, which we covered on the show and covered radical critiques and stuff. So I'm not, yeah, there's definitely a lot to the critiques, in my view, from the radical sort of progressive no campaign. But regardless, the AFL did officially support it, but they didn't really do anything to suggest they were supporting it. And I think this kind of, we've mentioned this, like hockey teams are like corporations, and like the AFL and the AFL teams are corporations too. And I think that's just a way of like doing what they kind of saw as the right thing to appease some people, but then also not actually telling anyone they supported. So if you Googled it, you'd find out they supported it. But if you're against it and you didn't go out of your way, they didn't. There was no announcement. So I don't. I'm not. I've got nothing angry at. So it's this way of just sort of like placating everyone to maximize market share rather than actually doing anything positive, I guess. So yeah, pretty typical corporate response, I guess.
yeah. That's really interesting in the context of the again something that we mentioned in the freedom of species episode around the Black Lives Matter when there was a call from Black Lives Matter movement to cancel sports games and some. I think all of the other codes, like the NBA, the NFL in the United States, cancelled them, and the NHL didn't. And I think they had like a minute's reflection or something, and then they put up on there like jumbotrons, "We skate for Black Lives," which is just the most meaningless gesture. But yeah, couldn't possibly cancel one game to show solidarity with Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Can't have an 81 game season. There'd just be no hockey on at all. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. I also wanted to briefly touch on the vegan issue in hockey as well. So it's something I have briefly mentioned on the show before, but it was something that I always kind of was like I'd read interviews with like one of my favorite bands are into hockey and they were like everything except my skates and gloves, like they play hockey as well, are vegan. So I was always, oh, that would be an issue. But I bought all my equipment before I became vegan, so I'll just last as long as possible and hopefully it'll work out okay. And then finally, my skates did kind of totally fall apart, needed new skates. And I found out that CCM, which is a very big like name
Mhm.
hockey, all of their equipment is vegan,
Oh,
skates,
wow.
gloves, everything. So that made it really nice. I did put up a blog post about that as well. And if you search like vegan hockey equipment or like vegan hockey gloves or vegan skates, it's one of the first Google hits, which is kind of weird because I was like, in this like weird like progressive left podcast world and I'm writing about hockey, like, no one's going to actually care, and so I was like, I care. I googled it and it was one of the first things that came up. So yeah, anyway, there is the vegan hockey equipment, so that was kind of nice. Obviously I'm not a single issue vegan, and just like as vegans I buy as much as possible for environmental reasons. I try and just hold on to my equipment for as long as I can, but it is nice to know eventually when gloves and skates have to be replaced that they'll all be vegan. um Vegan hockey players. There's one of the current players, Andreas Athanasiou, Chicago Blackhawks, is a vegan player, apparently. That was one thing I did from a quick Google. There's
Um,
also, I'll go
I
ahead.
think he plays on
Yep.
a line with Connor Bedard, who was the one I mentioned before. Or at least they've been trying them out on a line together. So that'll be really interesting. So I was saying about Connor's incredible diet.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. So
maybe he'll get some influence from his liney.
maybe, yeah. I haven't couldn't see too much more of that beyond just like his vegan, but also the final vegan thing, there's an ice hockey goalie who previously played in the NHL, Casimir Kaskasau, I believe. Probably not pronouncing it well, but anyway, he did play in the NHL. And he was recently playing in Sweden, and I've got family living in Sweden who are big hockey fans, and it was actually their team. And then he on his YouTube channel, he discusses his vegan diet and what's he eat as a hockey player and all that kind of stuff. So that was kind of cool. They were like, oh, the goalie for our team is vegan, and he talks about it on YouTube and stuff like that. So yeah, that was kind of cool. I think that's about all I had. But yeah, anything else you wanted to get to that you didn't?
I've almost finished all of my notes. The only other thing I thought was, has been a controversy this season that I thought was worth mentioning was the Shane Pinto case. And I think I briefly mentioned it in the Freedom of Species episode, but Shane Pinto of Ottawa Senators was suspended for 41 games, making the 22-year-old American the first player banned for sports gaming in modern hockey history, and that's since 1947 was the last person. The league said the half-season ban was for activities related to sports wagering, and that its investigation had, however, found no evidence that Pinto bet on NHL games. And from reading some interviews with him post the ban, it seems like he started an account and passed it over to his friend, and his friend was actually using the account. It wasn't even him that was still using the account. So it seems pretty heavy-handed on behalf of the NHL, particularly 41 games is a massive suspension. Like the most I've heard for people getting banned for really, really seriously injuring other players is like 6 games, right? So 41,
There
half a.
was a lifetime suspension, I
Oh,
remember a
was
while
it?
ago. Yeah, this is going
Yeah.
back a number of years, but yeah, yeah,
Okay.
it's very rare though.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I was listening to something the other day where, well, actually, the commentators, I think, were saying that actually people should be banned for as long as it takes the other player to recover from the injury. And given
Mm.
Nico Hersher was out for like 28 days with a really serious head injury, and he's the captain of the New Jersey Devils, I was like, absolutely. Like the other player, I think, got a 1 or 2 game suspension, and a really small fine for giving like someone a potentially career or a season-ending head injury. Um, uh, the irony of this is that this Shane Pinto's team, the Senators, became in 2021 the first team to add gambling related entity to their helmet with Bet99, and their home helmets now bear the logo of Betway, which is an international gambling company. And the NHL has an incredibly close relationship with gambling websites, including advertising within games, which I mentioned before. But also, my team, one of their sponsors is the Muckleshoot Indian Casino. And so when they have power plays, they're like, this power play is brought to you by the Muckleshoot Indian Casino. And I'm like, this is gross. Like, there's so much gambling promotion in the games themselves. And then this player gets a 41 game suspension. He's not even gambling on the NHL, and it's also his friend who's using his account. Like he plays for the Senators, which is a Canadian based team, and it was an American account that he had, so he couldn't even access it from Canada.
Mm.
Yeah, it just seems really, really heavy handed, but I think it brings, again, just shines a light on just the deeply embeddedness of these massive sporting corporations in, capitalism, and just general grossness. So yeah, that was
Yeah,
kind
it was the fourth longest suspension ever. So three have been suspended indefinitely or for life. But yeah, it was the first, the biggest beyond the indefinite or lifetime bans.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it's just wild.
yeah.
So yeah, that was the only other controversy that's sort of come up this year that I've been like, I'm gonna do some more reading on this. Yeah, because it's like when this stuff comes up, being a new fan, and I don't know much about the history, and so preparing for these episodes has been really great in terms of going away and reading a lot about like how the Pride Night started and how the Black Lives Matter stuff manifested in the NHL. It kind of had vague impressions, and I knew that JT Brown was involved and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, going away and I read like JT Brown wrote an essay that was published on I think NHL.com or one of the NHL websites about why in 2017 he'd started protesting around Black lives and police violence and stuff. So yeah, it's been really, really educative for me. But yeah, it's usually when stuff like this happens, I'm like, I'm going to do some more deep digging into this because this seems really dodgy and concerning. And yeah, something that I kind of want to. I mean, there's so much sports trivia you can fill your head with. Like I was saying before, the Hughes brothers' numbers. Like in homage to their mum, and then the other Hughes brother who didn't get number 43, he wears 86, which is 43 added together, which is really cute. So I know this random like hockey trivia now, but this is the kind of stuff that I'm really interested is in the politics of the sport and how and how politics, like you said, manifests all the time, even when organizations are claiming that they're apolitical. There's actually this manifestation of the real world in sports all the time. And the only other thing worth mentioning is that actually the first, or yeah, I think it's the first ever combined women's league starts on January the 1st, the PWHL, so the Professional Women's Hockey League. And that's an attempt. There's been a couple of rival women's hockey leagues running over the last couple of years, and this is an attempt to actually finally have a single women's league, and maybe actually start paying the women players properly, and actually, properly investing in women's development. And careers into this sport. So that'll be really, really interesting to see how that goes. I think there's 6 teams, and they have honestly spent a maximum of $5 on jersey design and production. Literally the ugliest jerseys that you would ever see. When they were launched, the comments were hilarious. People were like, please unlaunch these immediately, or please launch these into the sun. Oh, they were awful. Yeah, they don't have like logos like the men's teams or names. I think they've got names now. So there's like 6 cities and they've got, yeah, names now, and maybe they'll get like logos and proper jerseys hopefully by January the 1st. But yeah, it'll be really, really interesting to see how that goes. Um, yeah, and I think they're getting paid like now in the tens of thousands of dollars for a season, where the men, like the highest paid man, is getting $13.34 million a year, I think. And now they're paying the women like 30 grand a year, and the women are really excited because that's like 6 times what they were getting before. But yeah, hopefully that'll yeah, mean some excitement around women's hockey because it's well deserved. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And a reminder to listeners, if you want to check out our freedom of species discussion on, or 3CR summer special, we'll put a link up to that. We'll put a link up to a bunch of the articles we've discussed as well, so you can read into any more of this as well. I guess just my final question, actually, before we take off, is have you considered about playing hockey yourself?
I have,
Yeah,
yeah. I
yeah.
think watching, I'm like, have all these crazy fantasies about like, oh, you just put me on the ice and watch me go. But I can't even skate. But yeah, I'm kind of really intrigued to follow up on some of the Australian, like what's called the beer leagues.
Oh, yeah, yep.
Yeah, and see if they have any kind of like development sort of programs for new players.
There's
Because
heaps. Yeah, I can definitely let you know. But yeah, I think that is a common thing over the years, saying I play plastic. Everyone's like, that's really cool, but unfortunately I can't skate. It's like, yeah, I couldn't skate at one point as well. But yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. There's
yeah.
just like general sessions, but beginners hockey, all that. Yeah.
Yeah, they're like the tips, because there's some people in the NHL Facebook group I'm in, and they kind of give each other tips, which is really interesting, and stuff that you would never, if like as a casual skater turning up to one of the rinks in Melbourne, you don't get any really help or guidance. You kind of like given your skates and let go. Whereas, some of the people in the Facebook group I'm in are like, no, no, you need to wear like skates that are like 2 sizes smaller than your shoe size, like, and you should always practice with all your gear on, and all this kind of like tips and tricks that you wouldn't know unless you kind of had any background in playing yourself. So yeah, yeah, it's definitely, I don't think people should let, bad experiences at at a rink put them off, because I don't think that that would necessarily. And one of my friends actually played, like when I lived in Malaysia, randomly, my friend got really into ice skating. And at one of the local shopping malls, they had a as an ice skating rink, and she used to go and have ice skating lessons. And then her coach got her into playing ice hockey because he was like, "This is really good practice for you and stuff." So yeah, I'm pretty sure I went to one of her games. So that's the second game. So I've been to games in Slovakia and Malaysia, ice hockey games.
Nice.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Well, thanks for joining me, Claire, and thanks everyone for listening. And
If anyone
yeah,
lasted to the end of
yeah,
our
well, see, and
talk.
particularly anyone YouTube still watching. Hi, thanks for watching. I think that number's going to be fairly small. Yeah, fairly niche, but yeah, I really enjoyed it anywhere, and hopefully there's a few hockey fans who've enjoyed it, and hopefully even those who aren't have maybe enjoyed the other issues they care about, like Palestine and gender and race and all these issues in terms of how they relate to hockey. So
Yeah.
yeah, all right, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you.
Thank you.